like to welcome everyone to tonight's Astronaut Scholarship Foundation award presentation and lecture. I am Brenda Winkle, head of the Department of Biological Sciences, and I'm here to convey also Dean Sally Morton's regrets that she could not be with us tonight. She was unfortunately on the West Coast on university business, but she does send her warmest regards and congratulations to everyone. So she is with us in spirit, if not in person. Tonight we're here to honor several women in science, women who are dedicated to the fields of STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math. In particular, tonight with us, and I have to find her, is Arianna Krinos. Where did you go? You're right in front of me. I do this all the time. You are our special honoree tonight. She is a junior from Tampa, Florida, and a triple major in biological sciences, so my department, but also in computer science and in CMDA, which is a new degree program in the College of Science, focusing on computational modeling, data analytics. She is going to be one of the first graduates from that program as well, so she's a real adventurer in that regard. She's the recipient of tonight's Astronaut Scholarship Foundation Award, which is going to help fund her career here at Virginia Tech as she carries out vital research on the effects of climate change, land use changes, and pollution on water quality. She carries out this research in the lab of Kaylin Carey, who is a member of my department, and is an assistant professor of biological sciences. And it is Dr. Kaylin and her colleague Lisa Belden in our department who nominated her for this award this evening. I want to say just a few things about Arianna, because she really is in many respects the ideal Virginia Tech student. She is one who really appreciates and understands the importance and the power of cross-disciplinary education. So she's, as I've said, she's combining biology, mathematics, and computer science in her training. And this is really what we see as stepping beyond the boundaries of typical education. But she's not only doing that in the classroom, but as I've just mentioned, she's actually doing undergraduate research in some of the most cutting-edge research programs that we have, not just on this campus, but in this country. And so she is, as an undergraduate, already contributing to doing things in a very new way and adding some very new dimensions to the work that is already going on campus in the Carey lab. And so if any of you have seen the announcement today in the Virginia Tech News, you'll appreciate that also from the video that really shows this dynamic of the relationship between the professor and the student in these very special environments that we have to offer. I will mention that another very special thing about Arianna is that both of her parents are alumni of Virginia Tech, and so we're very proud to count her as one of the second generation Hokies. She's been interested actually in water for much of her life. As I said, she mentioned she grew up in Tampa, Florida, and so she regularly saw, growing up even as a youngster, the incredible natural places surrounding her, but also the significant environmental degradation that was taking place, probably more significantly in Florida than almost any other place in this country. I'll also note that because she grew up in Florida, she, in addition to being devoted to the field of ecology, she also is a lifelong fan of NASA and the exploration of space. And so she visited Kennedy Space Center as a child, and she could even watch from a distance the launch of many of the launches of the space shuttles from her front yard. So a wonderful connection to our speaker and honored guest this evening. So presenting the scholarship award and giving the public lecture this evening is former NASA astronaut Dr. Kathy Thornton. Dr. Thornton earned a Bachelor of Science degree in physics from Auburn University in 1974, and master's and PhD degrees in physics from the University of Virginia in 1977 and 1979. What's remarkable about Dr. Thornton is that she's a veteran of 4 space flights. Her first mission was in 1989 as the first female crew member aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery. She then served 2 missions aboard the Endeavour in 1992 and in 1993, becoming just the second woman to walk in space, and then aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia in 1995. Altogether, she has made 639 orbits of the Earth. She's traveled 17 million miles, and she's spent more than 975 hours in space. That's just astounding. That includes 21 hours of extravehicular activity, so this is a woman of incredible courage. She was inducted into the Astronaut Hall of Fame in 2010. Dr. Thornton left NASA in 1996 and returned to Charlottesville and the University of Virginia, this time as a faculty member in the School of Engineering, where she's now a professor and director of the Aerospace Engineering Program. I will also note that Dr. Thornton is the proud parent of a Virginia Tech College of Science alumni. So once again, we have this fabulous connection between the University of Virginia and Virginia Tech. Her daughter, Dr. Carol Hood, graduated in 2004 with a degree in physics and a minor in astronomy, and she is now an associate professor of physics at California State University in San Bernardino. Dr. Thornton has had a career that most of us dreamt about as children, and many of us also as adults. And as we are extremely honored to have you with us tonight. Thank you. Just a couple of other words here, and then I promise I'll finish and let you come up. So the other thing we are here to do is to honor the late Daniela Melissa Muheim. And we're very grateful that her husband, Des Welch, could be with us this evening. He is the sponsor of tonight's award, as you have seen on this beautiful banner, and he's going to help fund Arianna's education. Danny Muheim was an alumna of the Virginia Tech College of Engineering, where she earned a master's degree in engineering mechanics, and most of the work for her PhD in the same field, except for her dissertation about defense, which is not uncommon. She later worked at NASA Langley Research Center, where she was a structures analyst, and then at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, where she worked on the James Webb Space Telescope. Throughout her career, Ms. Muheim was a strong supporter of women in STEM efforts and held a special place in her heart for Virginia Tech. Mr. Welch, we thank you for being with us tonight and are extremely grateful for this kind act and continuing to your wife's mission to support women in science. It means an incredible lot to us. All right, let me finally mention two other wonderful guests who we have with us tonight from the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. They came all the way from Florida to be with us this evening. Laura Cutchins, who's the Executive Vice President of External Affairs, and Nicole Russ, who is the Scholarship Program Director. So thank you so much for being with us. All right, let me finish. I will just say one thing, which is that women really are an integral part of the sciences, obviously, if you look at this room, be it here on Earth in a computer lab, or on a lake collecting water samples, both of which things you do, and others who are in space, high above the Earth, exploring the mysteries of the universe. We want to thank everyone who's been a part of making this evening possible. The Astronaut Scholarship Foundation Award Program is something very unique and very special. We're very proud that Virginia Tech is a part of this program now, and the very special things that I hear that you guys do for our students and for the award winners. We also thank the Virginia Tech Women in the Sciences organization for sponsoring tonight's event. And so with that, let me then finally turn things over to Dr. Thornton, and she is going to actually present the award to Arianna. Thank you.
This is probably going to sleep. It'll be a problem in a little bit, but we'll worry about it then. I'm here on behalf of the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, who is in its first year of a partnership with Virginia Tech, and I am so pleased to be here for the first year of this. My daughter was here for 4 years, so we've made lots of trips down here, and I just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody at Virginia Tech for everything you did in the care and feeding of my baby, her future. You did a great job. She is a Hokie through and through. She has almost converted her Badger husband to Hokieism, and she's raising 2 little Hokies. So the legacy continues, and thank you so much for that. The foundation has dispersed over $4 million since it was established in 1984 as a way for the astronauts to try to help STEM education in this country and to support the best and the brightest. This year, the foundation awarded 45 scholarships worth up to $10,000 each. And I'm happy to present one of those scholarships here at Virginia Tech. The scholarship was sponsored by Des Welch, who's here with us today in memory of his wife, Danny. I didn't have the privilege of knowing Danny, but I just discovered that Des and I crossed paths back in Houston in training for STS-61, the Hubble Service Mission. He was teaching ascent procedures, and my ascent position was on the mid-deck, where all I could do was just look at lockers. So I didn't do a lot of ascent procedures, but he was part of that training crew that made that mission successful. So awesome. Great to see you again. It's a very small world, I have to say. The first astronaut scholar from Virginia Tech is Arianna Krinos, who's majoring in computer science and biological science, and you've already heard about many of her accomplishments. But let me read this one paragraph, and I'm reading this because I couldn't possibly paraphrase this. Arianna's present research objective is to meld earth science, biological science, and computation through the use of computer models and quantitative tools such as bioinformatics to describe and predict changes in aquatic ecosystems. She uses a distributed computing platform called Grapple to parallelize thousands of general lake model simulations in order to anticipate the impact of climate and land use changes. She also worked on research projects in molecular and computational biology for characterization of amphibian skin microbes and the effects of ocean acidification on the physiology of crustacean calcification, and hopes to further develop these ideas and skills in the future. Well, it's a great choice for the first astronaut scholar at Virginia Tech. I don't know how you could have done better. We'd like to present you this. The real money comes some other way. Congratulations. So let's, we in the, yeah, I think we're kind of in the way here. That's what it is. Oops, not straight. That's better. Okay, one more.
It's
Gotta
not
be
social
immortalized
media.
here. Still themselves. Congratulations.
Hi everyone. I'm so grateful for the support of the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. I was in DC in September for a gala put on by the foundation where I was introduced to the other 44 astronaut scholars, and it was just an amazing experience to be able to meet all of these students from all over the United States and to be able to call them my friends now and to talk with them on a regular basis through the magic of social media and group chats. And just that has been the most exciting part of the experience. But now here in this event at Virginia Tech, I am glad to hear about Dave's Welch, Mr. Welch and his late wife, Melissa Muheim, Danny Melissa Muheim. And I am glad to be able to honor Ms. Muheim's legacy as a student here at Virginia Tech and in the future as an alumna of the university. I'm very grateful for the support of Mr. Welch, and I'm glad to hear about the accomplishments of his wife. Being in DC, we visited Goddard Space Flight Center, and I was able to see some of the equipment that they used to build the James Webb, which she worked on during her career at NASA. And as was mentioned earlier, I've long been a fan of space. When I visited Kennedy Space Center when I was young, when I was 10 or 12, the first time we went there actually, I got to meet an astronaut at that time. I was just taken aback at the facility. Last summer when I went back as part of my research over the summer in Florida, I was able to visit, and just the magnitude by which they've changed Kennedy Space Center since last time I was there, it was just really impressed upon me how much NASA is able to do, and just really inspires me to tell people all the time how much NASA really needs a budget and how much they do in terms of science. Different areas of science are really impacted by NASA's mission, and I feel like the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, while they're kind of not affiliated directly with that, they definitely are able to kind of push forth the mission of these scientific arms, which really require the support of people that are able to come to events like this and really hear about what some of those people are doing in science and what we here at Virginia Tech are also able to do. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and thank you all for coming tonight for this event and for supporting both Virginia Tech and the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation as this partnership develops. Thank you.
I don't see a red light. Is this working? Sounds like it. Okay, I was asked for a title on my talk, and to be honest, I sort of wait till the Spirit moves me, and it's usually shorter time frame than that. So I said the title will be Why We Explore, which is a tough question. Why in the world do we do this stuff? So first I want to start out with this really short video, sort of to set the mood, and then talk about exploration in sort of a historical perspective. So cross your fingers and hope this works.
We are the explorers. We have a need to find what is out there. It is a drive inside each and every one of us. The drive to wonder, to push the boundaries, and to explore. We expanded across our lands, settling new frontiers. We took to the oceans and learned that we could cross treacherous expanses in the pursuit of discovery. And then we took to the skies and flew. But that wasn't enough. We left the planet and redefined what was possible. We flew in space. We walked in space. What once was a melodramatic flight of fantasy became reality. Then, a new generation of spaceships captured hearts and minds for 3 decades and helped build a castle in the sky that is our lasting home in space. We have always looked up. For centuries, we wondered what was on the other side of the sky, and we have begun to answer that question. We have learned that all the exploration humankind has achieved is only a beginning. Right now, men and women are working on the next steps to go farther than we have ever gone before. New vessels will carry us, and new destinations await us. Everything we have ever accomplished leads to this moment in time, where exploration will now take us to the planets and the stars. Our nearest neighbors in the night sky have beckoned us, invited us, dared us to reach for them. We are the explorers. Throughout our history, we have taken both small steps and giant leaps in that pursuit. Our next destination awaits. We don't know what new discoveries lie ahead, but this is the very reason we must go.
So we explore because we must. That's it. It's as simple as that. Because we don't know what's out there, and we absolutely must. So I started trying to think about exploration in a historical term, and with apologies to historians, my view of history used to be everything we forgot. And if we were clever enough to write everything down and catalog it and document it, we wouldn't need to go back and study history because we would know everything. Well, that's actually a pretty naive and stupid view of history. But I think it's one that many of, well, I don't say many of us hold that, but many of us are kind of parochial about our place in time. So there is the current era of me. So me started when I was born, me will end when I die. Maybe I'll stretch my event horizon beyond that because I have children and grandchildren. But basically, it's the time in which I live is the current era, and that's what's important. Everything before that is before me. Everything after that is after me. So there's the era of me. And nothing else matters. Well, that really, I had an epiphany in 1992. So these are Columbus's ships, the Nina, Pinta, and the Santa Maria, sailing past the Space Shuttle Endeavour on the launch pad a day before its maiden flight. So what do you think of when you see that? Photoshop? You think it was Photoshop? If you think it was Photoshop, who do you think took the pictures of Columbus's ship? That is a real picture, and it was in 1992. Those ships were built as replicas of Columbus's ships, and they were sailing up the East Coast to either New York or Boston for a big 4th of July celebration in 1992, the 500th anniversary. They just happened to be sailing past the Cape in Florida the day before our launch. So we were out at the crew was out at a beach house. Before launch, you're in quarantine for a week, and so you're in Florida, you can't go to town, you can't go to Cocoa Beach, you just sort of have to hang out in an office building where you live, and then there's a beach house on the beach where you can go and relax. And so we went out to the beach house, and we went up on the deck of this house, and we saw these ships sailing by. We chased them up the beach as long as we had time to do it, and then we came back. But there was a helicopter out there that took these pictures of Columbus's ship. So that was sort of, smacked me in the face. There's the future and there's history all in one photograph there. And maybe if we understand more about history, we can understand more about the future and where we are going. And about the same time, also triggered by this 500th anniversary, this NASA montage was printed. And this is called One Man's Lifetime. It's part of the NASA art program. Probably most people don't know NASA has an art program, but they do. They give artists access to places at Kennedy Space Center and others to produce their art. And this one's called One Man's Lifetime. So there's a covered wagon in the bottom, and there's the space shuttle, there's missions to the moon in the top. So this represents pretty much the history of transportation in the last century, from covered wagons to going to the moon. And what's intriguing about this to me is it reminds me of my Uncle Charlie, who died a number of years ago at 95 years of age. He remembered as a child traveling across Arkansas in a covered wagon. And then he watched me launch twice on the space shuttle. So that's a reminder of how much technology changes in a single lifetime, one single lifetime. If you talk to this kid in the covered wagon in 1900, whatever it was, about he would see people walk on the moon and somebody related to him would fly in space, he would have said, you were crazy. Can you imagine what he would have thought? You're nuts. So I think if we look at how much changed in his lifetime, that sort of expands our view of what might change in our own lifetime. Things that are absolutely impossible, cannot be done now, will be commonplace. Things we haven't even thought about to think about they can't be done will be commonplace sometime in the lifetimes of these younger folks here. So if you can think of history then in terms of not just one lifetime, but many lifetimes, or eras of exploration in the last millennium that were governed by the technology of the period, you can sort of, I think, help us expand our view of what might happen in the future. So this is a map of the world from 1490, 2 years before that very important event. It represents what was known about the land masses. So you can see there's some things there that were missing. This, I believe, was based on the calculation of the circumference of the Earth that was done by the Greeks. So you take the known land masses and you put that down on the Earth that they calculated, this is how big it is, and this is what you get. But they calculated the polar circumference and not the equatorial circumference, which is different. So they were missing a couple continents and a few oceans in that. So this is 1490. So one lifetime later, single lifetime later, 1543, this is what we in the West thought the world looked like. And I say in the West because in the East they had a whole other view of it. But this is what we thought. This represents Magellan's expedition around the world. And represents an age of discovery where we had the technology and the capability and the will to cross the great oceans. In that last map, we had the technology just to creep around the coastlines of continents. So if you remember from your 4th grade history, Prince Henry the Navigator and that kind of stuff, they were creeping around the coastline of Africa trying to get around the tip of it. And that was 200 or 300 year period where they were trying to do that. So one lifetime later, things just changed. And all of a sudden, we had the will and the capability to cross these great oceans. So this map represents another 200 or 300 year period of exploration where we had the capability to cross these great oceans. There's still some things missing here. There's a little bit of Antarctica there. Australia and New Zealand aren't part of this because they were not part of our consciousness in that period. So this is from 1543. So the 16th century, Australia became part of our consciousness actually in the 19th century, I think. 18th, 19th century, when Captain Cook did his exploration down there. So this represents a 200 or 300 year period of exploration with this technology. Then we moved into the next era of exploration, where we had the technology to explore the interior of the continents that we knew how to sail around. So this is what we thought the North America looked like in, I think this is 1702, so this is before Lewis and Clark. And so it's an exploration of North America, South America, the Gobi Desert, all the continents of the earth. And this period of exploration, so this is from 1703, this period of exploration kind of came to a close actually in the 20th century with exploration of Antarctica, the last continent that we explored the interior of. And that was, the exploration of Antarctica was kind of a paradigm shift, because before that there was exploration for treasure, for power, for converting people, for subjugating people, for things like that. Antarctica we explore purely for scientific benefit. So far, anyway. That's the way it is. So that's sort of the way we may move forward in exploring off the planet with international cooperation and for the purposes of science. So in the middle of the 20th century, we moved into a whole other age of exploration, the space age. We stepped off the planet for the very first time in the mid-1950s with the launch of Sputnik, the first human-made object to orbit the Earth. And that started the space race. And the space race, the original concept and intent with Sputnik and Explorer that the United States was trying to launch was not as an instrument of the Cold War. It was supposed to be as a scientific instrument. It was to be able to send satellites above the Earth to view the Earth system from that vantage point. It quickly became an instrument of the Cold War because it was a demonstration of technological prowess of the Soviet system versus the American system. And it became a real shock to those of us in this country that the Soviets beat us to it. It was an eye-opener, and that was the starting gun for the space race. We won, by the way. Spoiler alert, we won it. It was 12 years from the time the Sputnik launched until we had people walking on the moon. Awesome, awesome accomplishment in this new infancy of this new age of exploration. And we sent Apollos 12, 13 didn't get there, but 14, 15, 16, 17 to the moon. And then we kind of lost interest. We pulled back. We canceled Apollos 18, 19, and 20. So if you want to see the rockets, they could have been Apollos 18, 19, and 20. They are in rocket parks in Florida, Alabama, and Texas. They're relics of past history that are there. And we moved on to something else. So the post-Apollo program became a permanent presence in space, a space station, a way to occupy that environment and learn to use it for scientific purposes as a lab or an international lab to study things in an environment we can't simulate here on Earth. So we did that. We launched the space shuttle system in the first time in 1981. It was supposed to be part of a space transportation system. That's what STS means on the front end of each of those flights, a space transportation system. And it was going to have shuttles, that's why it's called a shuttle, to get back and forth to space. It was going to have space stations, plural. It was going to have space tugs to go out and grab geosynchronous satellites and drag them to the space station for repair and refueling. And they had to figure out, when they were trying to start that program, you obviously can't do all that at once, so they had to decide between building a space station and no way to get there, or a space shuttle and nowhere to go. So they opted to start with the space shuttle. So for a period of 20 years, the space shuttle was its own destination in space. It was a rocket ship for 8.5 minutes, it was a space station for up to 2 weeks, and it was a glider for the last 45 minutes of its flight, and it was the first reusable spacecraft ever. It was the most awesome machine ever built. It was a flying truck. A truck that could fly to space. It gave us capabilities we never had before anywhere in the world. It was the first one to be able to bring back any appreciable payload. We brought back a few pounds of rocks from the moon, but basically nothing else came back from space. So we would launch stuff up there and we would throw it away. And the Russians would launch stuff up there to their space station and they would throw it away. They would launch spacesuits, they would launch avionics, they would launch all kinds of stuff with no way to bring it home. Until we started rendezvousing with in the Shuttle Mir program with the Mir space station, we started helping them bring back some of their stuff. So the shuttle was a truck, and we're truly going to miss, I think, that capability to bring stuff home. Right now, SpaceX can bring stuff home, but pretty much nobody else. But good things come to an end. So we had a space shuttle, we got people up and back. It was a flying truck. And we built a space station using that flying truck. So we have a permanent presence in space for the last 17 years, there's not been a single second when we haven't had a person orbiting the Earth. It's been a long time. Talk to some of these, too many youngsters, but there's one over there. For her entire lifetime, we have had people in space. So people ask me, what's happened to NASA? Why are we shutting down the space program? We're not shutting down the space program. It's up there. It's up there. We're just not doing what we did before. So we do have a space station up there with people orbiting right now in space. The space shuttle, I know, has been retired. I tend to talk about it in present tense, and I'm not in denial. I truly understand it is in retirement, but sometimes I can't break that habit of talking about it in the present tense. But this is one of my favorite photographs of the last, I don't know if Discovery was the last, of Discovery being turned over to Udvar Hazy, the Smithsonian Museum. It went flying on the back of a 747 to Dulles Airport, where it landed and rolled over on the runway. But what I love about this picture is they follow road signs to Dulles Airport. Traffic in Washington stopped everywhere this flew in, and they did a big flyover in the Washington area. Traffic there just stopped everywhere. People pulled off the road because they saw this awesome big thing flying through the sky for the last time. We can see it again. So now we have 3 rockets. If you want to go see Saturn V's, they're in rocket parks in Alabama, Texas, and Florida. If you want to go see space shuttles, they're in Florida, Washington, and the California Science Center. If you want to see the shuttle that was used for the approach and landing test but never flew in space, it's in New York on the Intrepid. So more relics of the past, which is sort of bittersweet. It's sad that we're no longer in that business because it was the golden age of spaceflight. We loved it. We were flying people, so many people in that. That's how I got the opportunity to fly 4 times. I was at the right place at the right time to be there to get that done. But, it's time to move on. What this has done, what the space station has done and the space shuttle has done, is serve as an anchor in low Earth orbit. So in 1969, we sent people to the moon. We sent people 250,000 miles, 250,000 miles from here. Yeah, that's 250,000. I'm thinking metric there for a second, going, oh my gosh. And brought them back. But since that time, we have not gone more than 350 miles away from this planet since 1972. So it's kind of sad when you think about it that way. It's kind of like really pulling back, like going from that second age of exploration where we crossed the oceans to going back to the one where we're just creeping around the coastlines. And so, but if you get a little bit discouraged about that, I find comfort in looking at maybe a broader view of history, not just what's going to happen in my lifetime, but what's going to happen beyond that. If your view of space is the Earth-Moon system, yeah, we've fallen back a lot. If your view of space is the solar system, percentage-wise, that's not such a big fallback. But these things have served as anchors in low Earth orbit. We can't do anything else as long as we're putting all of our effort and energy into low Earth orbit. We have to be able to do something else. So where will we go in the next 30 years? Where will we go in my lifetime? What's left of it? My overall favorite is Mars. I think that's where we're all pointed. The Space Council just 2 weeks ago announced a plan to have intermediate stops at the moon to establish bases on the moon, or visit the moon to do some of the test and evaluation and development of technology we need before we send people on a trip to Mars. I was going to say non-refundable. It's definitely non-refundable, but it's also almost, you can't turn around on your way out there. Once you're heading to Mars, you're committed. Just like the Apollo 13 guys on their way to the moon were committed. When they had their problem, they couldn't turn around. They had to keep going, go back around the moon, but that was only a few days. On the trip to Mars, we're talking months for that to happen. So I think it's Mars. Whether we do an intermediate step on the moon, I don't know. But think about, can we do that? Of course we can do that. Of course we can do that. And that's just a tiny baby step compared to where we will go within this 300-year period of exploration. I don't think we can even imagine where that's going to take us. But we're turning that over to this next generation. So I want to describe a couple programs that are sort of long-term. It took a long time from conception to actualization and to the end of the program to sort of give you an idea of sort of the time sequence here. So the Hubble Space Telescope is the most productive scientific instrument ever flown. There are 15,000 guest observers. There were, I think it was 16,000 papers published last year on Hubble. It's been in space for 27 years. So for a lot of you guys, that's longer than you have been on this planet. That thing has been in orbit and operating for 27 years and promises to continue as an incredible instrument. But it didn't just start yesterday. It didn't start the day it was launched in 1990. The idea of it started actually around the turn of the century with Herman Orbit, who was one of the three godfathers of spaceflight and astronautics, who said, I bet we could put something on a rocket and put it in orbit around the Earth and a telescope that could look out. That was probably in the 1920s. That was pretty stupid. There weren't any rockets. How can you do that? You know, we couldn't launch anything in 1920. In fact, there were some people at that time that believed that rocket could not operate in a vacuum, that it had to push on air in order to move. And Robert Goddard wrote a paper about sending a rocket to the moon and exploding it on the surface to light up the side we don't get to see. And he was lambasted. There was an unsigned editorial in the New York Times that said if Dr. Goddard understood the basic physics that he's doling out to his students at Clarkson University, he would understand that that is impossible. You cannot do that. New York Times published a retraction on the day before the lunar landing. But he went on to prove that, in fact, rockets work better in a vacuum because they don't have to push the air out of the way in order to operate. So thinking about some weird nut scientist saying, let's put a telescope on a rocket and orbit the Earth in the 1920s was just crazy. It's absolutely insane. So Lyman Spitzer, who was a professor at Princeton, sort of resurrected that idea in about 1947. So the difference between there is the German rockets that had been developed during World War II. So we did then have rockets. We didn't have anything orbiting the Earth, but we had rockets that had been to space, or going to space at that time. And so he sort of resurrected the idea of putting a telescope in space, around the Earth, above the atmosphere, so that we could get clearer, better pictures up there, 1947. Well, the telescope was approved in the early 70s, built throughout the 1970s, launched in supposed to launch in 1986, was delayed because of the Challenger, finally launched in 1990 and went operational. It was part of NASA's great observatories. So their plan was to put up several of these instruments in orbit around the Earth, looking at different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. So there was the Compton Gamma Ray Observatory to look at gamma rays, Chandra in the X-ray region, Hubble in the visible and near UV, and then CERDIF, which later became known as Spitzer, in the infrared region to look across there. Of those, the only one that had the capability for humans to interact with it and repair it and fix it was Hubble by the time it was launched. It was a great idea. It might have been considered for all of them, but that was the only one for which that capability survived all of its years of development. It was assembled in the West Coast. This is, although the mirror, I think, was built on the East Coast at Perkin-Elmer. So this is the primary mirror. It's roughly 8 feet in diameter. And beautiful, great mirror. There are lots of reasons why the error in the curvature of it and the spherical aberration were not caught. You can read books about that if you want. At this point, it doesn't matter, but the primary mirror was not at the right spec when it was launched. The telescope was assembled, and this is in a clean room at Goddard Space Flight Center. It spent several extra years on Earth because it was scheduled to go. It was the second flight after Challenger. Would have been the second flight after Challenger in the early part of 1986. It was delayed. We were down over 3 years before we flew another space shuttle. And then there were some national defense payloads that bumped it out a few more years. So it was finally launched in 1990, in April of 1990, and deployed from the Space Shuttle Discovery. And there was incredible expectations for this first big telescope orbiting the Earth. And as you all know, those expectations turned to, oh no, shortly thereafter, when it was discovered that the images just would not focus. They could not focus. It was pretty quick diagnosis from looking at the images. What the problem was, that the mirror was ground a little bit too flat. 8 feet in diameter, and it's too flat by about the diameter of a hair. I mean, something on that order, like next to nothing, but enough. That it couldn't live up to the enormous expectations we had for it. So these are some images of, I forgot what, but this is a ground-based image looking through the atmosphere. You can see that's kind of a mess. This is what came back from Hubble when it was first operational. They looked at that and figured out the problem was spherical aberration, so the light that should have been in one Gaussian peak was spread out with lots of ripples on the outside. And so for sort of an isolated image here, they could mathematically shove all that light back into a single image. They could deconvolve it and smash it all back in and get some pretty decent pictures. So they could mathematically process this image to get this. Okay? So this is what we can get from the ground. This is what we can get from Hubble. Wasn't what we wanted, but it was way better than what we had. And so this motley crew was assigned on the first service mission to Hubble. It was always planned to have service missions every 3 years or so to fix things that were broken, to install new instruments as better technology became available or new investigations became important, and also to boost it up. There's drag, even at 350 miles up, there is drag, and that drag slows it down, causes the altitude to decrease. Hubble has no propulsion of its own. It can't boost its own orbit. And so every 3 years, the shuttle would come attached to it, kick it back up a little bit higher. So we were the first planned service mission to go up there, and as part of our regular service, we installed some instruments that corrected the spherical aberration. There were some people who didn't want us to touch it, because no matter how bad things are, you can always make them worse. In particular, people in planetary astronomy, because they were getting lots of observing time, but they were getting great pictures of the planets. It wasn't good for those distant objects at 10 billion light years from here, which is what we wanted it for. But since it wasn't good for that, they were getting lots of observing time with Jupiter, and they were having a ball with it. So some people didn't want us to touch it, for fear we would make it even worse. But we launched on December 2nd, 1993. That turned out to be my middle daughter's birthday. So when we got to orbit, I called down and said, "Hey Laura, those big candles are for you." And she didn't hear it because she was up on top of the Launch Control Center having a birthday party. So we did a bunch of stuff with it. We changed out the wide field of planetary camera. That's the instrument that sends the incredibly gorgeous pictures that we get from Hubble. That's this thing up here that looks like a grand piano sort of shape. Weighs about 600 pounds on Earth, weighs nothing up there. So that, the mirror on the end of that had the corrective optics to, no, actually that's not true. The mirror collects the light in the optical beam and reflects it into the camera. Inside the camera there was a mirror that had the corrective optics. So the light would get distorted in the primary mirror, get corrected in the interior one, and we got incredible pictures. This big box, it looks like a telephone booth, if you remember what those are. Somebody know what a telephone booth used to be back in the day? This is CoStar, and that corrected the other instruments. So the wide field of planetary camera could only correct itself. In the bottom part of the telescope, from like here down, there are 4 big boxes that look like that are the axial instruments. And they come together in the center axis, and they each have a little port in them, and that's their optical port where the light comes in. So we took one of those out and brought it home, and in its place we put this guy, whose name is CoStar, and that is an acronym I can never remember what it stands for, but that had the instruments, the mirrors that corrected all those other instruments. So in the little corner, its port, after we left it, the ground commanded this optical bench to come out, and then it had fingers that opened up, and on each finger was a little mirror about the size of a nickel. And so some of those had the corrective optics to take out the spherical aberration, and others allowed it to bounce around so that it could go into the other 3 holes there. So we saw it in a testing in Ball Aerospace in Colorado is where it was built, and we watched them deploy this thing. It was like something out of the movie Aliens. It was a lot like that, reminded me of that. This is actually me on the end of the arm. I'm always the short one. Everybody in this crew was over 6 feet, and then there was me. This weighed about 700 pounds on Earth, but it's a great equalizer. The challenge getting it in the telescope, so that's my spacewalking buddy Tom inside the telescope, and he was giving directions to me and also to Claude Nicollier, who was running the mechanical arm that I'm riding on, to get that thing in the box, get that thing in the hole. Because all I could see was silver. I'm holding it here, and there's nothing but silver. So we'd have to tilt it as he's directing me, and then Claude would slide us in. There was, if I remember right, maybe about an inch of clearance top and bottom to get that in there, and we weren't supposed to bump it. This is an optical instrument, so in orbit we talk about clearances of 2 feet. In astronomy or optics, you talk about clearances of microns. So we managed to get it in there. One of the interesting things in the training, Tom and I, and we've done a spacewalk before, we did 2 spacewalks together on this one, was sort of the perspective and the vocabulary. Now, Tom is a farmer. Tom he's in Missouri now, living on his farm, retired, enjoying life. And so when we talked about moving this thing, he thought it was a wheelbarrow. So he was on the front, I was on the back. So when he'd say, tip the front up, I thought it was a refrigerator, and I go, okay, and tip it exactly the opposite way. So we had kind of different mindset. So we came up with a sort of a complicated vocabulary of, toward your head, toward your toe, because up and down really has no meaning up there. So it's toward your toe. And we had these complicated things, but when we got down to really doing it, we reverted back to our own vocabulary. We'd worked together so long that even though we weren't saying the right words, we understood what the other one meant. And we slid that thing in there, and I would have bet you $100 that wouldn't have fit. Because the clearances were so tight, it was an inch top or bottom to get through that big hole, and then it narrowed down from there. And so every spacecraft we had ever serviced in orbit before that, there had been a problem with it. It wasn't built to the drawings we had, or thermal distortion over, thermal cycling 16 times a day for several years had changed it, and things didn't fit, and every single one, there had been something that was weird or fluky about it. And so this one, man, we didn't have any room for error at all, but it slid in just as neat as it could be. Slid right in there, we bolted it in. Closed the doors after that. We also changed out the solar arrays. So this is one we brought home. That's a short person again on the arm. This is supposed to roll up like a sort of a double window shade. And there's a kink in it right here, so it refused to roll up. We had to throw this one overboard in space. I actually got some letters from kids about littering in space. We were told that it would probably beat us home. It turned out to stay for about 5 years until we finally deorbited and burned up. We did some other things. We added some memory to computers. We added some magnetometers to the top of the telescope. We did some other cats and dogs. We did 5 spacewalks on that flight. And finally got it finished. This was our finished jewel. This is one of the last pictures we took of it before we dropped it off into space. And it was gorgeous. It was just absolutely beautiful in orbit. And that is the deploy right there. Unbelievable. So Claude McCollier picked it up with a mechanical arm and just let it go, and had no rates relative to us. It was just flying in formation with us, and then we moved away from it. Yeah, so we got back, and I saw this shortly after we landed. So we landed on about the 16th, I think, and I saw this in the grocery store. This is one of those highly reliable periodicals that you can buy at the checkout counter. And I do not subscribe to this, by the way. This is the only one I've ever bought. And I was like, wow, that's pretty silly. But during this time, after we landed, we didn't know whether we'd done the job right or not, because until we were long gone, they couldn't power up the telescope and begin to calibrate it and operate it. And so we got no advance warning of what was going on or anything. And because of that, we really couldn't celebrate when we got back. So it wasn't, we'd done everything we could correctly, and it all worked. But unless the telescope worked, then nobody was successful. And so we were all kind of waiting around like everybody else in the country into January about what was going to happen with the telescope. Is it working or not? And that's when I saw this. Hubble takes photo of heaven. This is Pope John Paul II, by the way, who's the Pope who finally pardoned Galileo for that heliocentric universe thing he had going on. So the idea is that, if Hubble's looking at an object that is 10 billion light years from here, it's looking at light that was created 10 billion years ago. So it's a time machine. It's looking back in time. If we can look far enough out in space, we can look far enough back in time to see the beginning, whatever it was, which apparently is heaven. So I thought, wow, this is pretty silly stuff. And then in January, when the first pictures came out, they looked like that. And I thought, wow, that wasn't so stupid after all. If you have an image in your mind of what heaven looks like, that's got to be pretty close to it. And I'm sure that many of you here could tell us a lot about that photograph. I really only know what my daughter tells me. The Eagle Nebula, it's about 7,000 light years from here. So this light was created about the time we were inventing the wheel. That's what it looked like then. We don't know what it looks like today. We have to wait 7,000 more years to find out. But it's awesomely beautiful, beautiful images and art. So just an example of what it looked like before we serviced it, what this looked like after we serviced it. It's like clean the They go out the window, really, is what it looks like. WIPIC 2 has come home now. WIPIC 3 is up there, so if you want to see WIPIC 2, it's in a museum in Washington. CoStar also came home at some point. They corrected all the instruments individually in the bottom part, so they no longer need CoStar. Took it out, put in another instrument in there, so pretty much everything we did has been undone. But, this is a project that started in concept, in about 1900. It was launched in 1990. It may go for, another 10 years. So that's sort of, a long-range view of a program from this is impossible, can't be done, to maybe we can do it, to yeah, let's do it, to it's done, sort of thing. To I knew it could be done all along, that's the next step. So, that happened, over a period of 100 years, basically. So I'm going to tell you a story that I hope will happen in the era of me. Now, the era of me is from when I started to when I end. So I'm right about here. So check out the pearls, the sensible shoes. By the way, you don't have to wait till my age to wear sensible shoes. Don't be a slave to fashion if it hurts. So I'm there. So this program, Mars. So in 1952 to 54, Collier's Magazine, which was a reliable magazine, it wasn't National Enquirer, did this long series on space. We were going there. We were absolutely going there. Where Von Braun was a part of this. Walt Disney was a part of this. Tomorrowland, the Disney World, came from this sort of stuff, looking into the future. Whole series, Man Will Conquer Space Soon, How Can We Get to Mars, Is There Life on Mars? We were serious about this back in the 1950s. Of course, everybody now knows that's impossible. You can't do that stuff. So in about 1989, under first President Bush, they started looking at what would it take to go to Mars. 1989 estimates, $300 billion. That's impossible. You can't do that. 1993 estimates, still impossible. 1998 estimates, yeah, it's still impossible. So everybody knows it's impossible. Can't be done. This was in 1998. So, okay, now maybe it's possible, but nah, it's still not feasible. So this is an estimate of what it would cost budget-wise. This is from 2014, and this is called a sand chart. And you call that because it's like those little things you make at the fair where you dump in different color sands. And each of these colors represents, budgeting for some program. And so this would be a flat NASA budget from now till 2050. The dotted line would be NASA budget that is increased only by inflation, which is probably a more reasonable estimate of what NASA can expect. You can see there's a lot of sand above that chart, so yeah, not feasible. 2014. Well, what if we do it a little bit differently? What if we don't go directly to the surface of Mars, but we do it in a series of steps? We push out the time frame of it, so we sort of pay as we go. Start with not going directly to Mars, but going to the moons of Mars. You have to solve all the problems of flying in deep space to get to the moons of Mars, but you don't have to have a landing vehicle or a launch vehicle. You just sort of rendezvous with them. Or a short stay on Mars, you don't build the whole base. You don't build, try to build in situ resource utilization or anything at that point. You just get there, and then you go for a long stay. So that slides, it sort of smears this out over a longer time frame. So again, flat NASA budget increased only by inflation. Hey, it fits. It fits. So the only problem I see with that is me. When I first saw that, which was a year or so ago, I went home and I got on the Social Security life expectancy calculator. So this is my expiration date, right here. So if I take care of myself and do everything I should do, maybe I can push that up this way. But I am really counting on you guys, you young folks, to make this happen in the era of me. Okay? It's all about me, of course. So it's a matter of when it's going to happen, not if it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It is absolutely going to happen. But I would like to happen for me. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, I would really be eternally grateful. So I don't know how many of you want to go with me. Who wants to go with me? All right. You guys do it. I think that is about it. Okay, so this is, why do we explore? This is why. Earth is the cradle of humanity, but mankind cannot stay in the cradle forever. We can't stay here. That's the answer. Okay, thank you. somebody gives me the hook. Here's the question. Yeah.
So you said that you were currently working in education right now. So a lot of students, kind of speaking as a student, so when we see like different economies and different job paths, like I looked at Virginia Tech University and I see a great aerospace program, so I know that I have a chance of working in planes and stuff. There's a great automotive manufacturing, where I can think about working on cars and stuff. But in a lot of universities on the country, there isn't really a dedicated space engineering program. Do you think that, and some universities are starting to have these programs. I know Virginia Tech is actually going to soon start this interesting space program through the electrical engineering department. But do you think that moving into the future, it's going to be important to start having more dedicated space engineering majors at the technical universities, so that students will kind of see, there's a very defined opportunity for space, and do you think that will help students, younger people, get more interest back into space?
I think young people are interested in space. I think it's interesting because I give a lot of talks and I get a lot of questions, and I can divide them questions sort of by age group. So little kids think they're going. There's no question they are going. They want to know the practical stuff. How do I brush my teeth? What do you eat? How do you go to the bathroom? How do you sleep? Because they're going. So about high school and college age, they figure out not everybody gets to go. So what do I have to do? What should I major in? What should I study? In order to be one of these people that gets to go. Then you merge into adulthood and the real life, and you just want to know next, what's NASA done for me lately? And then interestingly enough, with grandparents, they kind of cycle back to the kids because they believe anything is possible for their grandkids. So it's really awesome. So I think the interest is out there. One thing I will say is that the field of astronautics started in the 1960s. It started from whole cloth. I mean, nobody trained those professors to teach astronautics. They invented it. And so that's up to you to invent. So nobody in my parents' generation grew up wanting to be airline pilots. Nobody in my generation grew up saying, I'm going to be a web designer. There was no web to design. First we invented it. So it's up to you to invent the future. Absolutely. So yeah, I think it's great if we have programs dedicated to space, because I know that there are a lot of students who are interested in that, but I don't think that has to be a handicap if you're not in one of those. I think you can make it happen. You can teach yourself. You don't need us. You guys are smart. Yeah.
You're talking about the space shuttle and how it's highly reusable, and cost efficiency is really important for space travel. So do you think we should try to find the next equivalent of the space shuttle that's a reusable way to get to space and back?
That's a good question. That's partly a matter of economics, obviously. It costs more to make it reusable. Do you have enough market to make that worthwhile? I don't think, the reason that the space shuttle isn't our future is because it was a flying truck, and a flying truck is really big and heavy and can't go anywhere other than around the Earth. So I think that when we start talking about going beyond Earth, I don't know that the market or the flight frequency would be enough to support a lot of reusable stuff, although, as you know, Elon Musk is doing that and is reusing his first stage and is talking about reusing his second stage. Some folks from the industry perspective will say, yeah, but that's really not cost effective. I'd really like to know how much it costs to develop it and how much you have. But that's really not the point. I mean, he's developing some awesome technology that will be used to land on Mars. So, I don't know the answer to that question. I know we don't need a truck because a truck can't go anywhere. So you have to reduce the mass if you want to get outside of the Earth's orbit. And whether that's reusable or not, whether you could pay the mass penalty to make it reusable or not, I really don't know. Other question? I'm making this up as you go along, Yes, sir.
Well, you talked about the moonshot, and of course the history of the moonshot. I mean, we got to the moon because we dedicated tremendous amounts of government resources
You did?
into the program, and we got there. How do you feel about a moonshot for better transportation in America, well, in the world even. You know, the hydrogen fuel cell as it was tried back in 2000 and 2006 period, it didn't go anywhere. What's your feeling about that?
I don't know much about that. Yeah, we did have a big dedicated carte blanche program to get to the moon. Part of that was competition with the Soviets. It was influence of the rest of the world. It was the legacy of a martyred president, none of which that really applies right now. But because it was a sprint, you know, get to the moon, that's our goal, is get to the moon. You know, we did it a few times, and we said, okay, been there, done that, done, we're out of here. So, you know, I don't think that, I would like to not see that again. I would like to see a more measured, goal-oriented, continuing program. I'd like to see it not in competition, but in cooperation internationally, because I think that's absolutely what's going to be required. I believe we have a space station today because we have international partners. That after the Columbia accident in 2002, I think we would have shut that program down had it not been for our obligations to our international partners. That's just my opinion. I have nothing to prove that, but I really believe that's the case. And so when we're just sort of messing around and not funding it, you know, our partners pull us along, and I think we can do the same. So I think that I would like to see Mars mission to be different. I'd like to see it to be international. I'd like to see it be a continuing program, not a, oh, let's get there, been there, done that, and quit, and continue to move on from there. So, but fuel cell, I don't know about the hydrogen fuel cells. Yes, sir.
I had two questions about speed. Is it possible to go faster than the speed of light, so it didn't take so long to get these engines back? And second, is it possible for these rockets to go faster, so it doesn't take so many years to get to Mars?
First question, there are enough physicists here who would slay me if I answered this incorrectly. But, you know, I go back to, you know, if you talk to this kid in the covered wagon about sending people to the moon, he would say that's absolutely categorically impossible. So for what we know today, it is impossible to go faster than the speed of light. As far as rockets going faster so we can get there faster, I mean, there are possibilities of breakthrough in technology. We could use nuclear propulsion. We could do, you know, continuous thrust, low things. We wouldn't get there fast, but, you know, there's other ways to get there besides chemical rockets.
Oh, we're working on it.
Good question. I read something yesterday or the day before in Space News about NASA's reactivating a fusion reactor for surface operations of Mars. But as far as thermonuclear propulsion, there have been programs over the last 20 or 30 years that sort of start up and then die down, start up and die down. But each time that happens, you know, technology advances a little bit. So, you know, if we had a concerted effort and wanted to do that and got over our fear of nuclear, I think that we could. We can find other ways to do it. I'm not an expert on what they are, but I think they're out there.
One last question. Is there work being done to get to Mars because it can support life? Because we may need that because the Earth may explode or...
Some people believe that we need to establish another outpost in the solar system, that humans need to do that for our continued existence. Some people do it because we want to know, we want to explore.
But that's not an official government reason for doing, you know, trying to get to Mars.
No, not that I know. That would be a little too far out, I think. But I know a lot of people that really believe that. That in the long term, now they're talking about 1 lifetime or 2 lifetimes or 3 lifetimes, but in the long term, that it is in our best interest as human beings to establish other outposts, die exploring.
I understand Stephen Hawking believes that's necessary.
Yeah, there are other people too who are pretty smart folks. But that, you know, some people, you know, I kind of live in the era of me. You know, maybe I can live a little bit beyond that, but, you know, there's some people whose brains just work differently. They can stretch them farther than I can. Yeah.
So at Lockheed Martin, they talked about the fate of the ISS and how by 2024, something like that, that mission is going to be over. And the plan was that some corporate partner, someone like that, would take control of that. But in the video, they portray it as a permanent home for humans in space. So I was wondering what you knew about that transition and what that means as far as what the philosophy of the video communities.
Well, NASA, I think, has agreed to fund it through 2024. I don't know if all of our partners have signed on to that. I think most have, to continue to fund it to that point. NASA has a list of questions they need answered about human physiology and human interaction with that environment they need answered before they go to Mars. And they're scrambling to try to get those questions answered before 2024. There's an organization called CASIS, which stands for Center Applied Science in Space or something. And their goal, their mission is to try to get commercial interest in the space station and things happening on the space station so that potentially maybe it could transition to something else. Or maybe its lifetime is over and we do something else. We do free flyers, for instance. You know, we don't necessarily, space station it's like a truck. It's a big truck. Up there, maybe we don't need that much. Maybe we could have a bunch of free flying stations that we just go visit on occasion. Something like that, I don't know. But 2024 is the last that I heard anybody committing to fund. I have heard words like 2028, but I don't know how serious that is to continue. Yes, sir.
What were the inspirations that got you to space, and what are the inspirations that drive you now?
My life has been a random walk. When I was growing up, I never thought about being an astronaut because there weren't any women astronauts. And didn't appear to be any chance there ever would be any, so it never even crossed my mind it was a possibility. I was in Charlottesville working for the U.S. Army in sort of a think tank group when I saw an announcement NASA was selecting the next group of astronauts, and I saw their qualifications and it looked like just normal, healthy people. So I thought, okay, why not? All I do is say no. So I threw my hat in the ring and basically forgot about it. And then they called me up and said, hey, you want to come down for an interview? I go, yeah, that'd be cool. So I went down for a week, met a bunch of incredible people, awesome people. My fellow interviewees as well as the NASA folks. I thought this was the most exciting thing I've ever done in my life, and I'll probably never see Houston again. And then they called me up. So truly I stumbled into it. It's the best thing I ever stumbled into in my entire life. But it's the best job in the universe. It's hard to beat it, really hard to beat it. What drives me now? I don't know, just life. I'm still looking for another adventure. I think I have one or two more left in me. I don't know what they are yet, but I didn't know what this one was either. Somebody needs to give me the hook when it's time, okay? Because I'm just going to keep going. Yes, sir.
So you have to think NASA is going to be asking themselves in the future, do we send more people to Mars or do we just send more advanced robots? But how important do you think it is for them to send actual people and not just more robots?
What do you think how do you think we would differ if we just sent robots to the moon instead of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin? That actually is touted. We had robots on the moon before that. But that is touted as one of the greatest achievements of the 20th century. So it shows a capability, it shows a will. I was on someone's study committee, and I can't remember what the name of it was, but we were talking about this thing, why robots? I mean, why people, why robots? And one of the guys, a scientist who's actually one of the robot people, said when discovery transitions from reconnaissance to understanding, that's when you need people. So, and he was one of the PIs on the Mars rover, so he was a big robot guy. There's a place for both, obviously. We need robots for reconnaissance, and they can measure what they're sent to measure, but they're not as versatile. They're a little bit, I think, we recognize a little bit that they are precursors to human exploration. That's why we give them human characteristics. They're brave and they're plucky and we treat them like pets, pretty much, and we think that they're at least mammals, if not quite human. And I think that's because we want to be there. So, sending a real no-kidding human, I think, is a step that connects you and me. Well, you may be there, but me, I'm still going to be here to that place. Yes, sir.
You've mentioned that there would be some financial issues with getting to Mars, and then also there would be there's more research that has to be done concerning the human physiology. What other kind of issues or problems do you know of that impedes our ability to get to Mars?
There are a lot of groups that are studying this. Some of them are government, some of them are just groups of people who get together because they want to. There's a group called Explore Mars. If you Google that, you'll see they have a conference in Washington every year, which is pretty awesome. And there are other groups like that. And they put together these list of challenges, and I don't know what they all are. I think they group them in sort of 9 different challenges. One of which is we don't know how to do entry, descent, and landing of the amount of mass we would have to do to put a habitat on the surface. We've sent the Mars rover's Curiosity and Opportunity were, you know, the size of a small wagon, and Mars Science Lab is going to land in 2020, and it's, you know, the size of a small VW maybe, you know, so we're moving up. But we're talking about like, you know, 40 or 80 metric tons is what we're thinking about now, and we don't know how to do that. Mars has an atmosphere. It's enough to be a problem, but not enough to be useful. So you can't really fly in it, it's too thin, but you can't ignore it, it's too thick. You'll burn up. And so that's just one of them. So there's a list of about 9 of those things that they call, in NASA jargon, they're called long poles. And the idea there is that if you're under a tent, the longest pole sticks up the highest and everybody else can hide underneath. So if your challenges are smaller than this guy's challenges, you're in great shape. So nobody wants to be the long pole. So that's why they're called poles. So they're challenges. And there are about 9 of them that folks have identified. One of them is human factors. And one of them is the entry, descent, landing. And I don't remember what the rest of them are. But there are a lot of people who are looking at that, both professionally and just because they want to. What was that one? Yeah.
Do you believe there's other life forms in our universe?
Yes. I thought you were going to ask me about intelligent life. I was going to say, oh, geez, I hope so. I think we would be extraordinarily arrogant if we thought we were the only ones.
And the listening devices are still in place to try to hear sounds from space.
Assuming that they will talk to us in a way that we can understand it and recognize it, yeah. Which is also a little arrogant, I think. You know, they better speak English or else we're going to be in trouble. I just think we would be arrogant if we thought we were the only ones. I mean, why would it happen here and nowhere else in this incredibly huge universe? Yeah.
When you close your eyes and you think about your time in space, is there a particular moment that you think about as being like your favorite?
There was one. When you're spacewalking, you don't have a lot of time to look around because every single minute counts. You have to move really slowly to maintain your control of your body, and every second counts. But there was one time, it was on the Hubble mission. The Hubble is the highest, the Hubble service missions are the highest altitude the shuttle has flown. And so we're up there pretty high, and I was on the end of the mechanical arm, and I was being moved from one place to another. And you really have no sensation of movement up there because there's not any water dragging on you or no pulling anywhere. So I'm there configuring tools, getting ready for the next task, and the guys in Sykes called and said, "You got to look up. Stop what you're doing and look up." And I looked up, and we were over the Gulf of Mexico, and we could see at an oblique angle all of North America. So we could see the west coast and the east coast and Aurora up over Canada. And it was nighttime, and that's one of the reasons why you could see so well, is because it's outlined in lights, because people live along coastlines. And so all the continents are outlined in lights. The rivers are lit up because that's where people live. And so just this incredible view, like 180, which was, it was mesmerizing. That one, and then one other one was also spacewalking when I let go of the solar array. I let it go. I didn't push it off. I just let it go. Took my hands off of it, so it was floating out there, not moving, like right in front of me. And Claude Nicollier pulled me back on the arm, and then Ken Bowersox fired the jets to move us away from the solar array so we wouldn't recontact it. And the jet plumes hit the solar array, and it bent over in half, and came back out, sprang back out, and it was doing this flappy thing, and diving and cruising, and it was over the deserts in the Middle East, over the Sinai Peninsula and all that, which is a beautiful place to fly over. And it looked like this giant pterodactyl. And that was also mesmerizing. They had to say, okay, get back to work.
What is it called, a solar array?
Solar array, the solar panels on the side of the
Oh,
telescope.
the solar panels, okay.
Yeah, we had to toss one overboard because it wouldn't bang itself, roll up.
All right, one last question.
Okay, who's not asked one? Who wants to ask one? Anybody? Okay, I'll leave that.
So after Mars, when we settle, we put people on there, after the big celebration, what's next?
Wow. This is way beyond the era of me. Oh, I don't know what's next. It's hard to know. Someplace else where there is a possibility that it's harbored life or could support life, I think, where we decide that is at that time. Be my guess. Okay, I've got the hook. Thank you. Great.